In the quietest corners of Gotham, shadows began to stretch unnaturally, creeping where no light dared linger. Children whispered of a tall, faceless figure watching from the trees, their laughter cut short by sudden silence. Even the bravest felt it, an invisible pressure threading into their minds, twisting thoughts, eroding certainty. Heroes who once laughed at fear now found themselves hesitating, doubting every choice. And somewhere beyond sight, Slenderman smiled, not with teeth, not with eyes, but with a presence that promised one simple truth. The world of order, of heroes, of certainty, was about to unravel, and only the lost would survive. That the city had never felt quieter. Even Gotham's restless streets seemed to hold their breath, as though waiting for something unspeakable to arrive. Rain-slicked sidewalks reflected the occasional flicker of neon, but the reflections were wrong. They moved slower than the world, stretching, elongating, bending. Bruce Wayne noticed it first, not as Batman, but as a man awake far too late in the Wayne Manor study. The newspaper headlines were mundane: petty crime, an uptick in missing children, nothing extraordinary. Yet the photographs, the children's faces, seemed hollow, their eyes mirrors of someone else's terror. He couldn't explain it. Across the city, in a small apartment overrun by monitors and blinking lights, Tim Drake rubbed his temples. The Red Robin equipment was malfunctioning in ways that defied logic. Signals from the Batcave were scrambled, cameras showing shadows where none existed. Every child who had gone missing appeared on no record, no footage, as if erased before the act itself. A chill ran down his spine when he realized one pattern. The disappearances coincided with the emergence of a strange distortion, long, faceless, impossible to trace. Meanwhile, in Metropolis, Clark Kent noticed something wrong in the children's programming shows he monitored. Patterns of static flickered across screens, images that whispered, looping just long enough for no adult to notice, but long enough for impressionable minds to see. A faceless figure loomed in the corners, impossibly thin, impossibly tall. Children laughed one second and then screamed in nightmares the next. He tried to reach them, flying from apartment to apartment, but the figure receded before him, never moving the way it should. Fear was not just fear. It was something deeper, something invading thought itself. Back in Gotham, Batman convened a small meeting with the few allies still attuned to subtle threats: Barbara Gordon, Tim Drake, and Zatanna. He didn't need to explain. The reports of vanishing children, the odd recordings, the psychological strain on those investigating. They all knew. Something had entered their world, something that did not obey the rules of matter, time, or human comprehension. "This is not physical," Batman said, voice low. "It's mental, it's predatory, and it's learning." Across dimensions, Slenderman watched, not with eyes, not with emotion, but with intent. His form existed between the cracks of reality, stretching into the minds of the innocent, the fragile. Each thought he touched became a thread, tying memory to fear, connecting one child to another until a network of trembling minds spanned the city. He did not speak. He did not gesture. The mere presence was enough to seed paranoia, doubt, and terror. Even heroes, strong and trained, could feel the pressure, long fingers tugging at the edges of sanity. Dick Grayson noticed it while patrolling the rooftops. The children of Gotham, so many smiling faces he had known, trained and protected, now seemed like shadows. Voices called to him from alleys that had never existed, laughter that turned into cries the moment he approached. He tried to intervene, tried to catch a child appearing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Had his hands passed through? Nothing. Even the city seemed complicit. Streetlights flickered. Fog rolled unnaturally, and buildings leaned just enough to make you question if your eyes were lying. As night deepened, heroes began noticing the effect on themselves. Batman felt a shadow in his mind, questioning every plan, every contingency. Clark, despite near limitless power, felt hesitation in the smallest acts. What if his perception of right and wrong was twisted? Wonder Woman in Themyscira received visions of children trapped in faceless corridors, screaming silently, compelling her to doubt her judgment, her mission. Their minds were the battlefield now, and Slenderman was not fighting fair. The first contact came quietly. A child appeared on Bruce's back computer screen, eyes wide, lips forming words that were not theirs. "They are coming. You cannot save them." The message repeated across monitors, across cities, synchronized perfectly. Children vanished in silence, their absence marked not by noise or struggle, but by a hollowing in the collective consciousness. And for the first time, the heroes understood the scale. This was no ordinary threat. This was a predator of thought, a creature that thrived on fear, twisting minds before it ever touched flesh. Barbara stepped closer to the screens. "We're losing them," she whispered. "Everywhere we look. Gone. And not just the kids. Look at us. Look at how it's affecting us." Zatanna's lips trembled as she traced sigils on the floor, attempting to sense the intrusion. "He's not bound by magic, nor by matter," she said. "He moves in perception, in the mind, and the more you resist, the hungrier he becomes." Tim Drake clenched his fists. "Then we fight there," he said. "If he's in the mind, then we don't fight him physically. We fight him by keeping our wits, by holding the children's thoughts safe inside ourselves." Batman's gaze hardened. "It's worse than that. Once he begins, he spreads like a contagion. One child in despair, one thought of fear, it's enough to infect dozens more. The longer we wait, the stronger he grows. And if he reaches us—" His voice trailed, the unspoken dread hanging like fog. "Then we may all lose our minds." Outside, in the alleys of Gotham, the faceless figure paused at a lamppost, limbs impossibly long, stretching toward the windows of sleeping children. Its form was unreal, both simple and complex, a dark monolith against the night. The city's heart beat unevenly, as though even Gotham itself sensed the predation. Slenderman had arrived, and for the first time in a long time the heroes were afraid. The city breathed differently at night, and not in a human way. Buildings seemed to shift when no one was looking, alleys stretching impossibly long, shadows curling around corners that shouldn't exist. Tim Drake moved silently over the rooftops, his senses taut, every instinct screaming that the city itself had become a predator's playground. The disappearances weren't random. They were deliberate, a terrifyingly intelligent orchestration of fear and opportunity. Children vanished without a trace, leaving only hollow echoes of laughter and cries that could be felt more than heard. In Metropolis, Clark Kent floated over a school playground, his eyes scanning every corner, every tree, every shadow that could hide the faceless intruder. And yet, every time he thought he had a bead on it, the figure slipped away, not moving in space, but moving through perception itself. He reached toward a child clutching a small toy, only to feel the air empty. The child was gone, as if erased, leaving a memory burned into Clark's mind. Even Superman, near omniscient, felt a chill of helplessness he hadn't known since his earliest days on Earth. Back in Gotham, Barbara Gordon worked through the night in the Batcave. Screens showed the missing children, each one framed in a pale glow that flickered and bent unnaturally. For a moment she thought she saw their eyes, once innocent, now hollow pools reflecting nightmares they hadn't spoken.
It wasn't just Gotham. Every major city reported similar patterns: vanishings, whispers, shadows that moved when no one watched. A network of fear spread across the globe, and Slenderman's threads of control touched more minds with each passing hour. Zatanna's voice trembled as she traced protective sigils across a chalk circle. "We can't fight him the way we fight normal demons," she said. "He doesn't exist in the physical world. He's inside thought, inside imagination. He's feeding on the terror he creates. And the more we resist directly, the faster he learns." She paused, eyes narrowing. "And he's clever, he's patient. He doesn't just scare you." Felt it. The hesitation, the second guessing. That's him probing, testing, weakening us before the attack truly begins. Batman leaned against the cold steel of the Batcomputer, calculating patterns, timelines, probabilities. He always thought in contingencies, in certainty. And yet here, certainty dissolved like smoke. Every missing child was a thread, every frightened mind a knot in Slenderman's web. He knew what this creature sought: not just bodies, not just obedience, but control over the perception of the world. "We need to isolate the source," he muttered. "Find where it touches reality first. Cut the connection before it spreads further." Outside, the city trembled in small, subtle ways. Streetlights dimmed and flickered, shadows slithered along brick walls, and every window seemed to reflect a taller, darker figure watching from just beyond perception. A child in a small apartment whispered, "He's here." And the words slipped through walls, reaching ears that could not protect themselves. In another part of the city, a classroom of children went silent simultaneously, their attention drawn to empty corners where nothing should have been. And then, one by one, they blinked, and the desks were empty. Dick Grayson felt it the moment he looked away. In the briefest hesitation, a second of doubt, of questioning whether he could reach the next child, Slenderman extended his influence. Every instinct screamed danger, yet he couldn't see it directly. The figure's limbs, impossibly long, seemed to stretch through thought itself, twisting perception until fear became physical, until hesitation became paralysis. Even the night sky felt wrong, distorted, as if the stars themselves were being watched by something ancient and patient. Tim felt his own mind fraying. He could still move, still act, still strategize, but every thought was layered with doubt. "Am I seeing the truth, or what he wants me to see?" he muttered. He tightened his grip on the grapnel, trying to ground himself. Each child missing left a mark on the psyche of the city and on the heroes themselves. The realization came slowly, terrifyingly. Slenderman was winning not by force, but by patience, by fear, by the invisible erosion of certainty. Barbara noticed patterns emerging across the Batcomputer. Not randomness, not chaos. Slenderman's attacks were surgical, targeting the most vulnerable, the most imaginative, the most fearful. Every child he touched became a beacon, every beacon feeding a greater web of influence. The city was not just prey, it was a nest, a conduit. Gotham, Metropolis, even distant cities like Bloodhaven, they were all nodes in a growing lattice of fear. The heroes were caught in the network, their minds entangled as well. Zatanna's voice broke the silence, sharp and urgent. "We can't fight him with power alone. Not Batman, not Superman, not magic. This is a war of the mind, and the first rule of this war is, you cannot let him touch your fear." Her hands glowed faintly as she traced protective symbols across monitors, over screens, even over her own skin. But even as the magic spread, the children continued to vanish, and every hero felt the slow, gnawing weight of doubt settling into the corners of their minds. In the darkness, Slenderman watched silently. No words, no movement, no mercy.
Every child, every thought, every doubt was fuel. And as the heroes struggled to maintain focus, to protect what remained, he extended further, probing deeper. Gotham and Metropolis were no longer cities. They were mazes, puzzles, nightmares given form. And the heroes realized, with growing horror, that this predator had no intention of stopping. Not until every mind trembled under his shadow dot the storm of silence had begun. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't rain. It was the kind of stillness that pressed on the chest and made thoughts echo like screams. In Gotham, Batman stood atop Wayne Tower, eyes scanning the streets below. Normally he could read crime patterns in a heartbeat, predict movement, anticipate outcomes. But tonight every street, every alley, every shadow seemed alive in ways he couldn't calculate. He had trained for fear, for chaos, for superhuman adversaries, but not for this, a predator that lived in thought, that made hesitation lethal. Across the city, children's bedrooms were empty. Small beds lay undisturbed, toys untouched, lights still warm from recent use. Yet the air shimmered as if reality itself had been peeled back. Damian Wayne's voice came through the comms, tight and sharp. "Father, the children aren't gone, they're elsewhere, in their own minds." Batman clenched his jaw. He didn't allow panic, not yet, but the thought settled uncomfortably in his chest. Elsewhere meant nowhere he could reach physically. It meant he had to enter a space he couldn't touch, a mindscape governed by Slenderman. Meanwhile, Superman hovered over Metropolis, eyes glowing, scanning every school, every playground, every apartment complex. But his vision faltered. Each time he focused, the image shimmered, twisted, like a reflection in broken glass. He saw children playing, laughing, safe. He blinked, and they were gone. The sensation of loss was immediate, visceral. Every heartbeat thudded with dread. Every decision became a gamble. Even with his invulnerability, he felt fragile, exposed to forces he could neither hit nor restrain. In the Batcave, Barbara Gordon's fingers flew across keyboards, algorithms mapping patterns of the disappearances, trying to anticipate Slenderman's next move. But the more she tried to predict, the more the data warped. Lines of code twisted into shapes she had seen in nightmares, shapes that whispered when she wasn't looking. Her mind flickered with doubt. Am I imagining it? Or is he reaching here too? Her breath caught. The figure had already infiltrated the edges of her thoughts. Even the Batcave, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage of mirrors reflecting fear back at her. Tim Drake's mind was next. He had been following a lead to a warehouse where several children were reported missing. Every corner seemed ordinary, every shadow perfectly still. And yet, his instincts screamed. He saw them, glimpsed their frightened eyes behind the walls, behind the steel, but every step closer twisted reality. He could almost touch them, but each movement shifted the space. Floorboards elongated, staircases bent, walls melted. He stumbled, and for a moment the warehouse became infinite. His own memory of the city betrayed him. He realized Slenderman didn't just manipulate space, he manipulated perception, bending mind and reality until the two were indistinguishable. Zatanna appeared in a flash of light beside him, voice steady, despite the unease gnawing at her own mind. "You must anchor yourself, Tim. Do not let doubt take root. He thrives on hesitation, on fear, on guilt. The second you question your own senses, he can reach deeper." Tim's chest heaved, sweat on his brow. Every instinct told him to flee, to give up. But Zatanna's voice anchored him, a tether in the shifting nightmare. Tim clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus on the faintest trace of warmth, a memory of the children's laughter before they vanished. Reality rippled around him, walls bending like liquid, shadows stretching impossibly, and for a heartbeat he felt his mind unravel. The shadows whispered, soft, sibilant, insidious, "They are mine. You cannot save them." Every hero was beginning to fracture. Wonder Woman patrolled the streets of Bloodhaven, sword drawn, shield at the ready, yet every encounter left her disoriented. Civilians she tried to protect seemed unreal. Faces flickered, smiles froze mid-motion, eyes hollowed before returning to normal. She struck at threats only to find her blows passing through nothing, or worse, impacting hallucinations that dissolved into smoke. Her Amazonian certainty faltered. Doubt, for the first time in centuries of battle, gnawed at her. Even Martian Manhunter, with mind vast and powerful, was not immune. He could perceive Slenderman's presence threading through billions of thoughts, a dark tendril touching the most fragile corners of the human psyche. Children vanished from countless homes simultaneously, and with each disappearance, panic spread like an invisible contagion. Entire families felt a presence behind their eyes, and some children, too young to name the horror, screamed at empty rooms, a sound that seared itself into the hero's consciousness. Batman's focus sharpened despite the disorientation. He understood the pattern. Slenderman fed on vulnerability, but not just physical. It was the mental fractures, the smallest doubts, the thinnest edges of fear. If he could stabilize his mind and map the psychic resonance, he could trace the locus of influence. But time was already slipping. Each heartbeat without intervention meant more children vanished, more minds bending under the invisible weight of the faceless predator. Across the world, other heroes were reaching the edge of endurance. Green Lantern's constructs wavered unpredictably, flickering like fragile glass. Cyborg systems began registering anomalies, visual and auditory distortions that no sensor should detect. Flash moved at incredible speed through city streets, yet even his hyper-perception couldn't anchor him. The more he ran, the more the streets twisted beneath his feet, an endless maze of alleys and familiar landmarks warped beyond recognition. Every step forward threatened to lead him backward, or to nowhere at all. Slenderman didn't act openly. He never did. His power was psychological, omnipresent, and meticulous. He threaded into dreams, into half-formed thoughts, into the silent corners of consciousness. Heroes who prided themselves on courage and certainty found themselves second-guessing instinct, questioning what was real. Panic became contagious, and doubt multiplied faster than any villain could strike with brute force. In the dim light of a collapsing metropolis street, Superman tried to anchor himself with memory, images of the people he had saved, of those he could not. But even memory proved treacherous. Every face flickered with distortion, every saved life a pale ghost compared to what was lost. He felt the creeping pressure of despair, the subtle pull of Slenderman's will tugging at his mind. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and the nightmare could become permanent. And yet, not all hope was lost. Batman observed subtle inconsistencies in the patterns, moments where Slenderman's presence hesitated, flickered, or seemed delayed. These were cracks, evidence that the predator, as formidable as he was, had limits. He communicated quietly through comms, guiding the heroes to focus not just on strength or speed, but on anchoring themselves in certainty, memory, trust, and human connection. Satana's magic amplified this anchoring, weaving protective sigils not around the physical bodies, but within minds themselves, fragile shields in a war fought entirely on mental terrain. The children's faint psychic echoes guided her, whispers of resilience shimmering through Slenderman's fog. Every flicker of recognition, every anchor of emotion acted as a counterweight to his invasive power. But even as victories were quietly scored, the cost became apparent. Batman's own mind ached, Wonder Woman's grip faltered, and Martian Manhunter wept silently at the psychic strain. Slenderman's assault was slow, precise, unrelenting, and everywhere at once. The heroes were trapped in a psychological battlefield, a maze with no walls, no ceilings, no physical limits. Tim Drake finally reached the heart of the warped warehouse. The children's cries, distant but distinct, guided him. He felt the pulsing presence, the faceless shadow, stretching from floor to ceiling, and for the first time he realized the predator wasn't just controlling minds. It lived in the liminal spaces, feeding not on fear but on the hesitation and fractured trust of the heroes themselves. This was only the beginning, and already the lines between reality and nightmare were blurring. Slenderman had won small victories. He had claimed doubt, seeded chaos, and proven even heroes could be broken from within. But Batman's jaw tightened. He didn't give up. He couldn't. For every flicker of despair there was a thread of resolve, every vanishing child, a whisper that someone, somewhere, would anchor them back. The war for minds had begun, and no hero would emerge unscathed. Dot Knight had fallen over Gotham, and yet the city didn't feel like itself. Shadows twisted unnaturally across streets. Buildings seemed to lean in, listening. Batman moved silently through the fog, cape brushing wet asphalt, eyes scanning. Every alley, every rooftop whispered of children lost, of minds bending, of a predator beyond physical confrontation. He didn't see Slenderman, but he felt him. An absence that filled rooms, an emptiness that clawed at sanity. In the Batcave, Oracle's monitors flickered. Thousands of CCTV feeds from cities across the globe displayed nothing. The streets appeared normal at first glance, but under her scrutiny, patterns emerged, fleeting distortions, children appearing and vanishing from frames, shadows stretching impossibly across walls. "He's everywhere," she murmured, "and nowhere, and he's learning faster than we can track." Superman flew above Metropolis, eyes piercing the night, searching. Each rooftop felt like a trap, each street like a memory rewritten. He tried to locate the missing children psychically, but Slenderman had erected a wall of confusion, a psychic haze. Every attempt to reach them was met with nausea, whispers in languages unspoken, doubts implanted like seeds in fertile soil. Even his heat vision flared unpredictably, striking empty space, smoke curling as if reality itself rejected his power. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman moved through the outskirts of Bloodhaven, sword drawn, shield at the ready. Every citizen she approached seemed distant, muted. Conversations blurred, eyes flickered with unplaceable fear, and the children she sought were never where they should be. She struck phantom threats, her strikes meeting air, her warrior's certainty eroding. A mother's desperate scream reached her ears. Her child had vanished moments before. The panic, the heartbreak, pressed against Wonder Woman's chest like a weight she couldn't lift. Inside Arkham Asylum, the horror took a different shape. Tim Drake guided a small group of children through twisted corridors that weren't quite real. Every corner flickered, stairways looped impossibly, and whispers in 1,000 voices urged them to stop, to give up, to surrender. Tim held their hands, speaking quietly, clinging to every word of reassurance, but even he faltered. The shadows that followed were not illusions, they were presence, something that knew their fears, their secrets, their weaknesses. Slenderman didn't need brute force, he needed patience. One child screamed and a ripple of terror spread outward. Another disappeared from a parent's embrace. Batman's mind raced, mapping the connections, calculating probabilities, looking for patterns, but the pattern was chaos itself. The more they resisted, the more Slenderman adapted, and in every adaptation, he learned. Martian Manhunter reached Gotham mentally, extending consciousness across minds, trying to stabilize the chaos, but Slenderman anticipated him, infecting thoughts with subtle contradictions, small lies that festered into doubt. The children became anchors of confusion, their very existence a weapon against those trying to save them. Panic metastasized. Heroes began seeing friends and allies as threats. Trust fractured. And then it happened. A psychic scream so sharp it cut through Batman's concentration like glass, echoed from multiple cities simultaneously. The children were no longer just missing, they were trapped in nightmare constructs, each one feeding Slenderman more power. The heroes had never faced an enemy like this. Not someone who could strike with fists or weapons, but one who could invade memory, emotion, and reason itself. Zatanna's voice, strained but unwavering, cut through the darkness. We need to anchor them together now. But anchoring required perfect coordination, something impossible when reality itself was warping. Flash ran through streets that twisted endlessly, searching, feeling every step drag him further into vertigo. Cyborg scanners overloaded, systems failing under the psychic assault. Superman screamed, his voice lost in the cacophony of altered realities. Batman reached the warehouse where the psychic signature was strongest. Tim and Zatanna were already there, chanting protective wards, but the air inside quivered. Time slowed and stretched. Floorboards curled like ribbons, shadows moved against light, and the children's faint cries sounded both near and impossibly distant. Batman felt it. Slenderman was inside the building and inside their minds simultaneously. The faceless horror was studying them, learning how they thought, predicting every move. Then the warehouse doors slammed shut, though no wind blew. The shadows coalesced, towering into a form taller than any man, faceless, impossibly thin. Limbs stretched unnaturally, swaying as though suspended in a current invisible to the human eye. The children's cries stopped abruptly. Silence fell. The heroes froze. And then came the whisper. You cannot save them. You cannot save yourselves. Reality quivered violently. Walls folded, ceilings fell inward, and the very floor beneath them dissolved into an endless void. Batman steadied himself, fists clenched, but even he felt the tug of inevitability. The warehouse and the world was no longer their own. Slenderman had drawn them fully into the nightmare. Tim grabbed Zatanna's arm. We have to act. Now! But even as he spoke, the shadows shifted, splitting into multiple Slenderman forms, each taller, thinner, and more impossible than the last. The children's whispers echoed in every direction, fragmented and pleading. And the final, bone-chilling realization struck every hero in the room. Slenderman didn't need to kill. He didn't need to fight. He only needed to break their minds, one fragile thought at a time. And with that, the nightmare truly began. The warehouse had become a world unto itself. Gravity twisted, shadows stretched and pulsed like living veins, and every whisper carried the weight of a child's terror. Batman crouched, cape flaring around him like a protective shell, but even his stoic mind felt the pull of the nightmare. Slenderman was everywhere at once, sliding along walls, bending corners and crawling into their heroes' thoughts with faceless patience. Cyborg systems flickered wildly. Well, screens no longer displayed reality. They shimmered with warped landscapes, streets looping into themselves, children frozen mid-step, eyes wide with fear. He's not just manipulating the environment, Cyborg yelled, voice tense over the comms. He's rewriting perception. Every sensor, every camera, every mental link. Compromised. Superman hovered, fists clenched, eyes scanning. The sky inside the warehouse wasn't sky anymore. It was black, with streaks of red, a storm of impossibility. Every time he tried to reach the children with his heat vision, they flickered away, like digital ghosts slipping through corrupted code. "We need to anchor them," he muttered. "All together, or we'll lose them forever." Tim Drake's hands shook as he clutched Zatanna's arm. The protective wards she chanted shimmered faintly, but the shadows licked the edges like hungry smoke. He couldn't shake the feeling that every heartbeat was a countdown, every breath an invitation for Slenderman to study them deeper. The children's voices fractured into fragments of memory, a birthday song that turned into a scream, a lullaby that became a mocking chant. Their fear was power, and Slenderman was thriving on it. Batman moved first. He leaped toward the nearest shadow, batarangs whistling. The shadows flinched, but not in fear. They mimicked him, bending his moves against him, striking phantom blows that rattled his bones. For the first time, Batman felt the sharp sting of uncertainty. He had trained for every possible threat, criminals, metahumans, demons. But this was the unthinkable. An enemy that didn't exist in the physical plane, yet made every strike hurt like it did. Zatanna's chants grew faster, words spilling in a torrent of magic. Ancora corda mentis. Her hands traced complex sigils mid-air, threads of light attempting to bind the children's minds to reality. The first child appeared, floating, eyes wide, lips trembling. Relief washed over the group, but then the child vanished again, reappearing on the opposite side of the room, crying silently. Wonder Woman roared, swinging her sword into a cluster of elongated limbs. The strike met nothing but air, yet the backlash slammed her to the ground. The shadows coiled around her, whispering in unplaceable voices. They spoke of failure, of doubt, of every wrong decision she had ever made. Her certainty cracked. She was the Amazonian warrior, the champion, but here she was fragile. Superman gritted his teeth, heat vision flaring. He sliced through one of the towering shadow forms, but it split into 2, 3, then 5. Each faceless echo whispered in his mind, "You cannot save them. You cannot save anyone. Watch as they vanish." Cyborg barked orders. "We need a plan! Batman anchor! Zatanna, more wards! Wonder Woman, protect the children! Superman, stop overexerting yourself! You'll break first!" But even as he spoke, his own systems flickered. Internal voices whispered contradictions, alarms that didn't exist, sensor readings of danger where there was none. Slenderman didn't just attack bodies or minds. He attacked certainty itself. Then the children began to vanish, one by one. Not screaming, not running, but dissolving into nothingness, leaving only echoes of their voices in the warped air. Each disappearance sent a shockwave through the heroes' psyches. Batman's jaw tightened. Wonder Woman's hands trembled around her sword hilt. Superman's eyes widened in panic. Even Zatanna faltered, her incantations losing rhythm for a heartbeat, and that was all Slenderman needed. A single child remained, trembling in the center of the warehouse. Tim stepped forward. "It's okay," he said, voice quivering. "We're here. We won't let you go." But the air shifted. The warehouse stretched impossibly upward, the ceiling folding into itself. The floor cracked open, swallowing Tim's boots halfway into a shadowy abyss. The child screamed, but the sound was sucked into the twisting void. Then came the whisper, louder than before, echoing in every corner of their minds. "I am inevitability. I am the end of certainty. Bend or disappear." Batman planted his feet. "No," he growled, "we don't bend, we fight differently." Wonder Woman nodded, voice firm despite the fear. "Together. Anchor them together." Cyborg systems glitched one final time, then locked. A single blue light pulsed steadily, feeding data directly to the heroes' minds, a fragile map of psychic pathways Slenderman was exploiting. Zatanna's voice rang out, stronger than before. "Bind! Focus! Reality!" The shadows surged, Slenderman's form towering impossibly above them. Limbs stretched beyond perception, faceless presence consuming light and sanity alike. One by one, the heroes extended themselves, mental, physical, magical, anchoring to the last remaining child. Every heartbeat synchronized, every thought aligned, creating a fragile tether to reality. Slenderman shrieked, the sound not physical but mental, a resonance that could fracture minds. But the tether held. The child blinked, then stilled. A single ray of normalcy cut through the nightmare. The shadows writhed, recoiling, but did not disappear. Batman's voice cut through the chaos. "This isn't over, he's learning, and next time he'll be stronger." Superman's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll be ready, and next time we fight his mind before he touches anyone else." Zatanna whispered,
exhausted. "He's patient. Too patient. We've only delayed him." And from the fractured corners of the warehouse, Slenderman watched, faceless, waiting. The nightmare was temporarily stalled, but the war had only begun. The city had never felt so empty. Streetlights flickered, as if hesitant to illuminate what lurked beyond sight. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching impossibly, writhing toward nothing and everything at once. The children who had vanished from the warehouse left cracks in reality, small, subtle, but growing. Slenderman's reach had extended far beyond that single nightmare zone, and now every corner of the DC universe became potential ground zero. Nightwing led a small strike team through the streets, eyes darting at every darkened alley. His pulse raced, not from physical exertion, but from the whispering. Every step carried echoes of voices that weren't there. Children calling for help, familiar tones warped into taunts. His mind fought to separate reality from intrusion, but every time he blinked, a shadow stretched across his vision, bending the cityscape in impossible angles. "He's here," Nightwing muttered, voice trembling. "He's everywhere." Batman monitored the city from the Batwing, trying to map the disturbances. The children's vanishings were no longer isolated. They appeared to be scattered, drifting between dimensions that overlapped reality. For every street he cleared, another anomaly bloomed. Reports came in, a kindergarten in Gotham, a playground in Metropolis, even a quiet suburb in Bloodhaven, children gone, leaving nothing but silence and a faint psychic residue. Batman's jaw clenched. Every calculation, every plan he had rehearsed failed. Slenderman wasn't just hiding in shadows. He existed between thoughts, exploiting the tiniest cracks in perception. Cyborg joined from orbit, voice tense over the comms. "I've traced the psychic echoes. He's building a network. Each child's mind is a node. He's connecting them, forming a hive. The more children disappear, the stronger his influence." His systems flickered violently. "And he's learning, faster than we can track, faster than we can adapt." Wonder Woman moved through the streets, sword drawn, shield raised. Her senses, attuned to danger and deception, screamed of unnatural intrusion. She reached a small park where children were playing, or at least what appeared to be children. One boy stared directly at her, eyes black, pupils gone, a shadow stretching from the back of his head like a living void. Wonder Woman froze, realizing instantly. Slenderman had reached them here, embedding fragments of his consciousness into innocent minds. The boy's lips moved without sound, and in her mind, his voice whispered, "Join us. Accept it. You cannot protect them." Superman hovered above, scanning with heat vision. He pinpointed several anomalies, children frozen mid-step, hovering slightly above the ground, faces blank, unblinking. The sunlight bent around them unnaturally, shadows deepening like ink. When he attempted to intervene, the children flickered like corrupted holograms. Every time he tried to reach one, the tether snapped and a small pulse of psychic pain reverberated through his skull. In a small alley, Batman confronted a faceless shadow that loomed taller than any building. Its limbs stretched impossibly, brushing skyscraper edges, whispering histories he had never lived and horrors he could never forget. The whispering was precise, surgical, designed to destabilize memory, erode confidence, and force doubt. Batman's grip on reality faltered for the first time. He could almost hear Alfred's voice, but it was twisted, distorted, accusing him of failure. Meanwhile, Nightwing located a cluster of children trapped in a narrow plaza. Their minds were linked, eyes, black pools of awareness manipulated into collective fear. The shadows crept in from every angle, wrapping the plaza in darkness. Tim Drake tried a makeshift ward, drawing runes in chalk on the ground, but the shadows warped the markings mid-air. "It's bending reality!" Tim shouted. "We can't stop it physically. He's in their minds and ours." Zatanna appeared in a burst of light, chanting rapidly. The wards glowed, a protective bubble struggling to hold shape. She reached the children, touching one's head gently, whispering a soft counterspell. The child screamed, faceless tendrils recoiling, then blinked, normal, yet trembling. One down, hundreds to go. Zatanna's exhaustion showed in every line of her face. "This is just the beginning," she warned. "He's learning faster than we can counter. He's patient, too patient." Superman landed beside her, fists clenched. "We need a plan beyond force. We can't punch him into submission. He exists between perception and thought. He's everywhere and nowhere at once." Batman's mind raced. He envisioned a strategy: divide, isolate, anchor. Force Slenderman to fragment by striking at the psychic nodes, children, but carefully so as not to harm them. Every hero understood the risk. One wrong move and the child was gone forever. Every failure strengthened Slenderman's hive. Suddenly, a pulse radiated through the city, a ripple that twisted streets, made walls stretch, and turned windows into black mirrors, reflecting their deepest fears. The heroes staggered, clutching their heads. The whispers weren't coming from the shadows anymore. They came from the city itself. "You cannot protect them. They belong to me. All of you belong to me." Wonder Woman roared, deflecting the whisper with her sword, cutting a path through the shadows. Superman focused on stabilizing a plaza, light bending unnaturally around him to hold the children in place. Batman coordinated from the Batwing, issuing precise directions. Tim Drake and Zatanna anchored a group of 10 children, maintaining fragile contact with reality. But every heartbeat revealed a terrifying truth. Slenderman wasn't merely hunting them. He was studying them, learning their weaknesses, infiltrating deeper. Each child saved was temporary. Every child lost strengthened him. And far above, faceless and impossible, Slenderman watched it all, whispering into the void. "Patience. Everything bends to me eventually." The city itself had become a labyrinth of madness. Streets bent like liquid glass, buildings leaned impossibly, and shadows pooled into living shapes that whispered unspeakable truths. Every hero felt it, the slow seep of Slenderman's influence into thought, perception, and memory. Even the strongest minds began to falter. Batman moved cautiously through a warped Gotham alley, his cape brushing against walls that seemed to pulse like skin. Every step was accompanied by whispering that felt intimate, personal, probing, eroding confidence. You failed before, you'll fail again. Each word was a blade cutting into his logic, his resolve. The faceless figure loomed above him in impossible proportions, its limbs brushing the clouds, stretching into every corner of the city. Yet its form flickered like smoke. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus on strategy instead of fear, but the creeping doubt threatened to paralyze him. Nightwing had cornered a cluster of children on the rooftop of an abandoned school. They huddled together, their small bodies trembling, eyes blackened by the psychic tether Slenderman had woven. Their whispers echoed in the minds of the heroes, repeating fears they'd long buried. You can't save them. You're too late. You're not enough. Nightwing's own nightmares intruded. The memory of parents lost, friends abandoned, the crushing weight of failure. He blinked and nearly fell, but caught himself on the edge of the roof, heart pounding. Cyborg, monitoring from orbit, grew frantic. The network of psychic nodes connecting the children was expanding exponentially. Slenderman wasn't merely abducting them, he was merging their minds into a single hive consciousness, a web of fear and obedience. Every child connected strengthened him. Every interruption the heroes attempted was anticipated and countered. His systems flagged anomalies in their behavior, sudden hesitation, moments of uncharacteristic fear. He's adapting, Cyborg warned, faster than any of us can adjust. Wonder Woman confronted a group of children in a playground, only to see them split into impossible shapes as their minds bent under Slenderman's will. Shadows erupted from their bodies, snaking across the park like black flames, attacking her senses with whispers of futility. She swung her sword, cutting through the darkness, but the whispers penetrated armor and magic alike. The children didn't resist. They weren't aware of their own bodies anymore. Their souls seemed intertwined, a hive that answered only to the faceless master. Superman attempted a physical rescue, lifting a group of children into the air. But as he held them, their bodies flickered like holograms. Their screams twisted into the voices of loved ones long gone. Every attempt to physically extract them caused psychic backlash, a searing pain that left him shaking in mid-air. His vision blurred, mind teetering on the edge of collapse. Slenderman was in their minds, but also in his, threading fear, doubt, and despair into the very neurons of his consciousness. Batman regrouped with Nightwing and Zatanna in the remnants of a shattered library. Books and walls warped impossibly, the room expanding and contracting like lungs. Zatanna whispered counter-charms, her voice shaking as shadows flickered against her skin. "We can isolate him temporarily," she said, "but each child we free makes him stronger elsewhere. He's dividing and conquering every thought. Every fear is a weapon." Nightwing's head throbbed. "We can't fight him like this. He's not a creature we punch or trap. He's everywhere, inside every mind, every dark corner. He doesn't just attack bodies, he attacks the essence of hope itself." Suddenly, one child, a small girl with a crooked doll in her arms, stepped forward. Her black eyes flickered with a hint of awareness, a glimmer of defiance. "Leave us alone," she whispered collectively through the hive. Her voice reverberated in the minds of the heroes, a fragile anchor. Slenderman reacted instantly, shadow limbs snapping toward her, tendrils slicing through the warped reality around them. The city itself seemed to groan under the psychic assault. Batman's mind raced. If even one child could resist, the hive could be fractured. But the risk was monumental. One mistake, and the girl could be consumed entirely, feeding Slenderman's power beyond recovery.
Nightwing and Zatanna coordinated, forming a psychic containment grid, chanting spells layered over technological stabilizers, trying to isolate the girl's mind as a pivot. Slenderman recoiled for the first time in the encounter, its massive form flickering as though the tiniest ripple of defiance disturbed its immense control. But it adapted instantly, sending psychic shards into the minds of the heroes themselves, visions of failure, fear, and lost innocence, designed to make them surrender before the battle had truly begun. Wonder Woman, cutting through tendrils of shadow, shouted over the chaos, "We protect their minds as fiercely as their bodies. If we lose this, he wins entirely." Her voice echoed in the warped streets, anchoring the scattered heroes, reminding them why they fought, not for glory, not for control, but for the children's right to stand unconsumed by fear. The flickering of Slenderman's form revealed a terrifying truth. It was learning, evolving, and improvising with every heartbeat. The city itself had become its weapon. Reality warped, children's minds trembled, and heroes teetered on the edge of sanity. And yet, a fragile line of resistance persisted, a single girl, a few heroes holding ground, a psychic anchor of hope. It was barely enough, but it was all they had. Above them, Slenderman's presence lingered, faceless and impossible, whispering to every mind in the city, "Surrender, or watch everything you love become mine." The city shuddered, as if reality itself were a fragile membrane stretched over Slenderman's will. Streets folded in on themselves, buildings twisted into impossible angles, and shadows slithered like living ink across walls. Every child still tethered to the faceless master screamed silently in their minds, a chorus of fear and obedience that threatened to drown the hero's resolve. Batman crouched atop a fractured rooftop, scanning the warped skyline. His mind raced, calculating probabilities, escape routes, psychic shields. But Slenderman had anticipated every strategy. Even his rational, methodical thought felt alien, as if the city itself were mocking him. The whispers crawled along his spine. "You failed before, you will fail again." They weren't voices, and they were memories twisted into threats, insinuating his every weakness into reality. He clenched his jaw. Failure wasn't an option. Not for them, not for the children. Nightwing ran along broken ledges, shadows clawing at his legs and arms. The children's minds flickered around him like broken holograms, some reaching for him, others recoiling, all screaming in silent torment. Each attempt to touch them physically triggered psychic backlash, visions of lost friends, forgotten parents, and unspoken regrets. He screamed in frustration, lunging forward again and again, his body trembling as Slenderman's influence seeped into every corner of his consciousness. Cyborg systems were on the verge of meltdown. The psychic network connecting the children was no longer linear. It had become a chaotic web that defied calculation. Each freed mind caused a ripple, but Slenderman adapted instantly, bending the remaining minds into tighter, more resilient clusters. "He's evolving faster than we can react," Cyborg said, voice cracking with urgency. "Every child left under his influence strengthens him exponentially." Wonder Woman fought through a playground that had twisted into a nightmare of black, writhing tendrils. She raised her sword, slicing through the shadows, but the children themselves were the battlefield. Their eyes flickered black as Slenderman reached through their minds, each flicker of resistance causing violent psychic feedback. She screamed, not in pain, but in defiance, "You will not claim them, not while I draw breath." Her voice became a rallying anchor, a tether pulling fragmented heroes towards cohesion amid the chaos. Then, In a brief, miraculous instant, one small boy, barely 7, stumbled forward from the shadows. Unlike the others, his eyes were clear, unbroken. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He simply reached out with trembling hands. The psychic hive recoiled subtly, and Slenderman's shadow flickered, as if it sensed a fracture in its control. Batman saw it. Nightwing saw it. Wonder Woman saw it. The smallest act of defiance in the face of impossible power. Zatanna's voice cut through the psychic chaos, chanting a complex weave of containment and disruption spells. "Focus on the one," she shouted to the others. "Anchor him. The others will follow." Every hero redirected their attention, forming a psychic shield around the boy. Cyborg augmented her magic with technomantic stabilizers, projecting barriers of light that flickered over the twisted streets. Slenderman's form shuddered violently. Its faceless visage bent, stretching and snapping in the night sky, tendrils flailing as if physically restrained by unseen hands. It screamed in a way that resonated not through sound, but through bone, nerve, and thought. "They are mine. All of them are mine." The whispers intensified, clawing at the heroes' minds, but they held, anchored by shared determination. The boy's defiance spread like a spark. One child resisted, then another. The psychic hive trembled, faltering as the smallest embers of free will ignited. Slenderman's hold, once omnipotent, became tenuous, fragile. Shadows faltered, tendrils recoiled, and the twisted reality began to revert. Buildings shivered, streets straightened, and the oppressive air lifted slightly, though the city was still a scarred ruin. Superman, gathering the freed children, felt the psychic backlash fade slightly. They were not fully recovered, but the anchor of defiance had created cracks Slenderman could not easily mend. Wonder Woman, sword still raised, shouted across the streets, "Hold them! Protect their minds!" Every hero pressed the advantage, pushing against the faceless master with the combination of psychic focus, raw power, and sheer will. And then Slenderman did something new. It fractured itself, its form splintering into multiple faceless shadows, each smaller but still menacing. It was no longer a single entity, but a swarm of malevolent intent. Each fragment tried to reassert control over the remaining tethered children, but the psychic anchor of hope, the one small boy supported by the heroes, held firm. Finally, in a moment that seemed suspended between eternity and despair, Slenderman recoiled. Its faceless forms collapsed into the shadows, retreating into the corners of the city and mindscape, leaving behind faint echoes of whispers, but no active control. The children blinked, eyes clearing, fear still present but no longer manipulated, no longer a weapon. The city was scarred, heroes were exhausted. Minds trembled with lingering fear, but the nightmare had been broken. The smallest act of defiance, a child's refusal to yield, had created a ripple that toppled the faceless terror. Yet even as relief washed over them, Batman knew the truth. Slenderman had not been destroyed, only delayed, only pushed into the hidden corners between minds and shadows. And somewhere beyond perception it waited, patient and eternal, for the next fracture in courage to exploit. The city's skyline was a fractured mirror, each shard reflecting the terror Slenderman had sown. Shadows moved independently of light, curling across streets and alleys like sentient smoke. The air carried a subtle hum, an almost inaudible resonance that invaded every hero's thoughts. Batman felt it first, a creeping weight behind his eyes, the sensation of 1,000 invisible fingers pressing against his skull. He gritted his teeth. This wasn't fear. It was the beginning of madness. Children had vanished overnight, not into darkness, not into tunnels or back alleys, but into mind escapes that twisted reality itself. Reports flooded in, playgrounds empty, homes silent, neighbors claiming entire blocks of children had disappeared. Each disappearance left behind faint traces, distorted shadows on walls, whispered giggles in empty rooms, fleeting shapes at the edge of perception. The police were powerless. The children were not simply missing. They were in someone else's domain entirely. Superman hovered over the city, scanning every street, every rooftop, every alley. Heat vision cut through darkness, but even that could not penetrate the veil Slenderman had drawn. Every child's mind radiated like a beacon, but the signal was scrambled, twisting with hallucinations, impossible geometries, and recursive fear loops. He tried to reach them telepathically, but the whispers flooded his thoughts. They will not answer. They belong to me now. Wonder Woman stood at the epicenter of the chaos, sword-drawn eyes narrowing. The whispers were not localized, they were everywhere, in the wind, the shadows, even her own heartbeat. She had faced gods, monsters, and armies, but nothing had prepared her for a terror that could invade her own mind without warning. Her sword hummed with ancient magic as she muttered protective incantations, yet the shadows stretched further, curling around her like dark smoke, testing her resolve. Batman convened the heroes in the Batcave, the tension palpable. Cyborg systems hummed with anxiety as he relayed psychic readings. "It's evolving," he warned. "Every child it touches strengthens its influence. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to retrieve them. And it's learning from us, adapting." Nightwing rubbed his temples. "We're losing the city's children, and we're losing ourselves in the process. How do we fight something that attacks your mind as much as your body?" The first wave hit before the team could respond fully. Reports of hallucinations streamed in. Teachers screaming at empty classrooms. Parents attacking each other over imagined betrayals. Playgrounds erupting into chaos as children turned on one another under Slenderman's subtle influence. Panic rippled across the city. Heroes rushed to intervene, but even their perception was distorted. Superman misjudged distances. Wonder Woman's sword seemed to warp in her hands. Batman's gadgets flickered unpredictably. Then the visions began targeting individual heroes directly. Nightwing's mind was assaulted by recursive images of children he had failed to protect, countless versions of himself repeating mistakes over and over. Wonder Woman saw the innocent faces she could not save, each one accusing her silently. Superman was flooded with the cries of millions of children, their pain and terror amplified, vibrating through his entire being. Every hero's resolve was tested, stretched to breaking. Slenderman did not appear physically. Its presence was far more insidious. Faceless tendrils of thought invaded every psychic gap, twisting memories and fears, reshaping perception, feeding on guilt. Each hero was trapped in a nightmare that mirrored their deepest regrets, every failure magnified into unbearable weight. Their bodies moved automatically, but their minds floundered in terror loops. Cyborg realized the pattern. It's not just controlling the children, it's studying us. Each failure, each emotional response, it's using it to refine the next assault. Batman's jaw tightened. Then we need to stop reacting. We need to dictate the battlefield. We need a trigger the creature can't anticipate. Meanwhile, Slenderman struck subtlety itself. In some neighborhoods, the children returned partially, but not intact. Their eyes glimmered black, their movements disjointed, as if the puppeteer's strings remained even in apparent freedom. Parents and guardians screamed at the unrecognizable behavior. Heroes tried to intervene, but each attempt fed the entity more data, more fuel for its next phase. Zatanna joined the team, weaving spells designed to stabilize the psychic field, but even her magic faltered under Slenderman's adaptation. He anticipated countermeasures before they were completed, turning defensive wards into distortions, forcing the heroes into improvisation. "We're in its world now," she whispered grimly. "We're walking inside its mind, and it controls the walls." As night fell, the city became a labyrinth of fractured perceptions. Street lamps glowed with unnatural colors, buildings loomed impossibly high, and shadows formed corridors that led to nowhere. Every hero's grip on sanity was tested, and at the center, Slenderman watched, patient, calculating, waiting for the moment when despair could finally shatter them completely. But even in this darkness, Batman noticed a single constant, a faint spark of awareness in the eyes of one child in East Gotham, a spark untouched by the pervasive influence. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was the spark of hope in East Gotham was fragile, flickering like a candle in a storm. Batman focused all his mental discipline, narrowing in on the child. The boy's gaze was clear amid the chaos, a single point of resistance against Slenderman's sprawling influence. "If we can anchor him, maybe we can reach the others," Batman thought, every muscle taut with urgency. Nightwing led a small team through the warped streets, but the city had transformed into a nightmare reflection of itself. Sidewalks curled upward like waves, street signs rotated endlessly, and shadows seemed to whisper, tempting them to turn on each other. Every turn felt preordained, yet nothing made sense. Slenderman is shaping this, Nightwing realized. Every choice we make, every hesitation feeds it. Superman hovered above, scanning the distorted skyline. The children's psychic signals pulsed in irregular patterns like heartbeats under siege. He attempted telepathy again, reaching toward the nearest child, but found only a maze of memories, each more horrifying than the last. The child's innocence was buried beneath layers of fear and confusion, memories twisted by Slenderman's subtle manipulations. Wonder Woman's sword glimmered faintly, tracing protective wards into the warped reality around them. Each strike against the creeping shadows that crawled along the walls seemed to slow the chaos, but only briefly. Slenderman adapted faster than they could counteract, appearing in reflections, in the corners of eyes, in fleeting glimpses where nothing should be. Zatanna's spells were pushed to their limits. "He's not just attacking their minds," she warned, voice trembling slightly. "He's rewriting what they perceive as reality. If we lose focus for even a second, they'll forget who they are." Her hands moved in precise gestures, tearing apart psychic bindings, but each disruption drew Slenderman's attention, and the entity retaliated instantly. Shadows elongated into spindly arms, grasping at the hero's consciousness, forcing them to struggle just to stay anchored in their own perceptions. The boy in East Gotham remained the key. Batman, Nightwing, and Zatanna formed a protective perimeter around him, but the streets themselves had become enemies. Buildings warped into impossible angles, staircases led to ceilings, and sidewalks opened into infinite voids. The child's laughter echoed, a sound both joyful and eerie, piercing through the fear like a beacon. Slenderman reacted immediately, tendrils of thought slicing toward the boy, a psychic knife aimed at extinguishing that fragile hope. Superman dove through the chaos, attempting to shield the boy's mind, but even his invulnerability could not protect him from the invasive tendrils. The entity probed memories, twisting them, replaying failures, and forcing guilt into impossible proportions. Each hero felt their will stretched thin, every failure they had ever known replayed with excruciating clarity. Then came the breakthrough. Zatanna's magic, synchronized with Batman's mental focus, created a tether from the boy's mind outward. "A lifeline," Zatanna whispered. "If we can stabilize this anchor, We can reach the others. The tether pulsed like a heartbeat, faintly luminous, fragile, but unyielding. The heroes synchronized, projecting calm, resolve, and clarity into the boy's consciousness. Slenderman's response was immediate and violent. The shadows coalesced into massive humanoid forms, faceless and towering, striking at the tether with psychic fury. The heroes pushed back, Superman's strength, Wonder Woman's wards, and Zatanna's spells converging into a defensive network that kept the tendrils at bay. The boy's spark of awareness became a growing light, small but defiant, holding against the overwhelming darkness. The first other child emerged from the psychic fog, a girl in a nearby street, her eyes wide with recognition, her fear halved but still present. Batman's tactical voice cut through the chaos. "Reach for her! Show her she's not alone!" Nightwing extended his hand, forming the human connection that Slenderman's logic could not erase. One child's mind connected to another, and the anchor strengthened, each successful connection weakening the entity's grip. Slenderman recoiled, the shadows fractured into chaotic fragments, each tendril attempting to regroup, but the hero's synchronized focus created a ripple effect through the psychic landscape. The children's minds, linked through simple acts of trust and recognition, began to resist. Their fear no longer fed the entity, it became a battleground of shared clarity. Yet the victory was partial. The city still quivered under Slenderman's influence. Hallways looped endlessly, shadows whispered in corners, and distant screams reminded the heroes that the nightmare was not over. "We've bought time," Batman noted, "but this is just one neighborhood. He's everywhere. And the more children we save, the angrier he becomes." Superman clenched his fists, determination hardening. "Then we keep going," he said, voice resolute. "One mind at a time, one anchor at a time. We don't retreat." Wonder Woman nodded, sword humming with renewed power, ready to protect each child they reached. Zatanna's spellwork became more intricate, weaving resilience into every corner of the psychic battlefield. Nightwing's coordination kept the team moving efficiently through the Nightmare City, each step calculated yet fluid. The heroes had won the first clash, but Slenderman had learned. Its patience was endless, its malice meticulous. It would return with greater precision, targeting not only children, but the vulnerabilities within each hero's mind. And yet, amidst the fractured streets and distorted reality, the spark of hope endured. A spark small, fragile, but unstoppable. And in that spark, the war for the children's minds had truly begun. Here. And in that spark, hope flickered dot. The city had grown silent in a way that made every sound feel amplified, like footsteps in a cathedral. Slenderman was no longer just a predator, it had become an architect of terror, reshaping reality itself to trap the heroes inside their own fears. Every street, every alley seemed familiar yet impossible, and every reflection promised judgment. Batman moved cautiously, eyes darting, calculating, but even he felt a creeping disorientation. This isn't just a city anymore, it's a mind, he realized, and we're walking inside it. Elsewhere, Wonder Woman found herself standing in a looping corridor of mirrors, each reflection showing not herself, but failures, moments when her choices had harmed those she swore to protect. Each reflection whispered accusations, slicing at her resolve. She swung her sword, shattering one mirror, only to see the image of another failure appear in the shards. Her breath quickened, but she forced herself to focus. I am more than my mistakes. I protect because I choose to, not because I am perfect. Superman's struggle was quieter but no less intense. The entity had infiltrated his mind, twisting memories of Krypton, of Lois, of moments where his failure to save even one person had burned like acid. Shadows clawed at his conscience, feeding on guilt, forcing him to relive every catastrophe he could not prevent. It's endless, he thought, heart pounding. It wants me broken, but I won't give it that victory. Every pulse of his heat vision, every flinch against the tendrils of doubt, became an anchor for his sanity. Batman discovered the first trace of Slenderman's method. The entity didn't just invade minds, it harvested certainty. Every confident thought, every sense of control became a leash for it to pull. Heroes who relied on instinct without reflection found themselves overwhelmed first. That's why it targets the children, Batman realized. Their minds are open, impressionable, but the way it manipulates adults, it's insidious. It weaponizes what we trust most, ourselves. Nightwing darted through the warped streets with a growing sense of urgency. He found a child huddled under a crumbling archway, eyes wide, lips trembling, paralyzed by visions of monsters that weren't real. The moment Nightwing spoke her name, Slenderman appeared as a shifting silhouette behind him, impossibly tall, its faceless head bending like smoke toward the child. Tendrils of shadow reached toward them both, and the child screamed, not with fear, but with confusion, as memories of her parents' voices were twisted into commands to submit. Zatanna arrived just in time, weaving a protective circle. Her voice, steady and strong, cut through the psychic noise. "You are not alone. Hear me, child. Hear yourself. Remember your strength." The shadows recoiled slightly, hissing like wind through dry bones. The child blinked, confused, then slowly reached out, grasping Nightwing's hand. The tether of clarity strengthened, a fragile cord in a storm of psychic darkness. But Slenderman was relentless. It split into multiple manifestations, stretching its faceless form into dozens of mirrored versions, attacking different members of the team simultaneously. Superman faced a grotesque version of Lois, accusing him of abandoning her and the world. Wonder Woman saw herself kneeling powerless in front of countless faces of the innocent she could not protect. Batman confronted endless visions of Gotham burning, citizens lost, failures multiplied infinitely. Nightwing was confronted by distorted memories of fallen allies, friends he could not save, faces twisted in silent screams. Each hero felt their anchor wavering, each anchor, their moral certainty, their control over fear, was tested beyond human limits. One wrong thought, one moment of doubt, and they could be lost, not just physically but mentally, trapped in Slenderman's psychic nightmare forever. Then came the moment that broke through. Superman, fighting through hallucinations, projected calm through sheer force of will, connecting telepathically to the children already anchored. Wonder Woman's sword emitted a steady pulse of energy that seemed to push the shadows back, while Zatanna's magic reinforced every link, amplifying the growing network of clarity. Batman and Nightwing moved like a coordinated mind, anchoring children and heroes alike to moments of grounded reality. A laugh, a remembered kindness, the sensation of sunlight, a human heartbeat. The shadow tendrils recoiled in surprise. Slenderman's influence, though massive, could not sustain itself against the combined resilience of minds connected by trust, care, and deliberate awareness. Every child reached became another point of resistance, each one creating a ripple that weakened the nightmare city. Still, the entity adapted, morphing into more abstract, horrifying forms, endless staircases, dissolving roads, walls that seemed alive and breathing. Its power was immense, but its precision faltered in the face of human connection and persistence. For the first time, it hesitated. The faceless head tilted, tendrils twitching, as if it had never encountered resistance like this before. Nightwing breathed heavily, keeping the children moving. "We can do this," he muttered. "One step at a time. One mind at a time. Don't let it win in your head." The words were small, almost fragile, but in a world shaped by fear they were defiance. And for a fleeting, crucial moment, that defiance spread. The children stopped trembling, the shadows hesitated, and the heroes found clarity again. A single, synchronized thought echoed through the network. We will not be broken. The battle was far from over. Slenderman's nightmare had only begun, and the entity was learning, evolving, and growing more cunning by the second. But for now, in this fractured street of East Gotham, a fragile victory had been won. A light had pierced the darkness, small but undeniable. And in the distance, Slenderman's faceless form recoiled, not defeated, but aware. The entity's patience was infinite, but the heroes had proven something critical. Connection, trust, and defiance were stronger than the shadows. The nightmare was far from over, but the first cracks had appeared. Gotham had become unrecognizable. Streets twisted impossibly, buildings stretched into impossible angles, and shadows moved independently, alive with malevolent intent. Slenderman was no longer subtle. It had learned from the hero's previous resistance and now launched a coordinated psychic offensive, assaulting every mind in the city simultaneously. The skyline bled into nightmares, faceless children calling for help, clocks running backward, and skies filled with shifting shadows. Even the strongest mental shields felt like sieves against the entity's reach. Batman led a small group of civilians through a warped alleyway, the concrete walls bending like liquid. Every corner held illusions of his past failures. He saw Robin fallen, Alfred screaming, Gotham's citizens crushed beneath debris, but each image flickered, impossible and distorted. This is the test, Batman realized. Slenderman wants us to doubt ourselves completely. He clenched his jaw and whispered, "We endure. We survive. We act." Every word anchored his mind, a fragile tether against the entity's tidal wave of fear. Meanwhile, Wonder Woman faced a relentless assault of memory and morality. The entity pulled images of innocent people trapped in danger, overlaying them with impossible choices: save one or let another die. Every path she considered twisted into grotesque contradictions. Her sword slashed through illusions that solidified like iron, but for every figure she freed, two more appeared. Sweat ran down her brow as she realized this wasn't just about control, it was a war of perception. "I must decide not for perfection but for courage," she told herself. Each act of clarity, each deliberate choice, weakened the nightmare threads around her, but the strain was immense. Superman floated above the chaos, hearing the screams of Gotham folded into Slenderman's reality. The entity manipulated memories of Krypton and Lois, flooding him with guilt and doubt. The sky itself seemed to fracture, clouds twisting into monstrous, faceless forms, raining shadows that whispered despair. He screamed, not in pain, but in defiance, projecting his mind like a lighthouse. Streams of psychic energy reinforced civilians and heroes alike, pushing back tendrils of corruption. For brief, brilliant moments, clarity returned, but the strain burned like fire, testing his every nerve. Satana and Nightwing moved through the streets together, guiding children and trapped civilians. Satana's magic created temporary sanctuaries, glowing circles of calm amidst the chaos. Nightwing's agility allowed him to reach terrified citizens before Slenderman could distort their perception. But the entity adapted, splitting reality further. Every safe zone flickered and threatened collapse, forcing them to improvise continuously. The streets themselves became a labyrinth, endlessly reshaping, a reflection of Slenderman's own mind. Amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. The children, those Slenderman had manipulated most ruthlessly, began responding to one another. A whispered laugh, a shared phrase, a remembered game, small acts of recognition became anchors of sanity. Slowly, the network of mental clarity expanded. The entity hissed and recoiled from the simultaneous resistance. It can't control them all at once, Batman realized. Every mind that connects is a crack in its foundation. Slenderman grew more aggressive, forming massive, towering silhouettes that stretched from street to sky. Its faceless head tilted toward each hero, tendrils probing for doubt, fear, and hesitation. Wonder Woman's sword glowed as it struck tendrils that lashed at her, each impact resonating like a bell of defiance. Superman used raw strength and mental focus to blast shadows, his eyes glowing red with psychic intensity. Batman moved strategically, predicting the entity's attacks and guiding civilians through safe pathways, while Nightwing protected vulnerable points. Even with coordinated resistance, Slenderman's assault was relentless. It reached into personal fears with surgical precision, forcing heroes to relive their deepest failures simultaneously. Wonder Woman imagined leaving innocents to die. Superman imagined Lois lost to him forever. Batman imagined Gotham burning endlessly under his watch. The psychological toll threatened to fracture them, but the anchor of connection, the small acts of hope and mutual support, held, tenuous but unbroken. Then came the pivotal moment. A child trembling in a distorted playground reached out to the heroes with unspoken courage. That single act created a ripple, a burst of collective will across the city. Each anchor point multiplied, forming a chain of resistance too vast for Slenderman to fully consume. The entity shrieked in psychic frustration, its faceless heads writhing, shadows collapsing inward, tendrils flailing. It realized for the first time that fear alone would not win. The city's streets quivered as Slenderman pulled back, but it did not leave quietly. Its form fractured into countless images, each a harbinger of future nightmares promising return. Gotham was scarred, reality itself bent, and the heroes were pushed to the brink, yet they had endured. They had survived the psychic apocalypse, anchored by connection, courage, and choice. In the aftermath, the heroes regrouped, exhausted but unbroken. Children clutched their hands, Gotham's citizens stared at the twisted remnants of their city, and each hero silently acknowledged the mental scars they now carried. Slenderman's retreat was not defeat, it was adaptation, planning its next invasion. But for the first time, the entity had encountered resistance it could not immediately dominate. And somewhere in the dark folds of fractured reality, Slenderman watched. It waited, learning from every failure, aware that the war for minds was far from over. But the heroes had discovered a truth the entity had underestimated. Even in the face of overwhelming fear, connection, courage, and persistence could shine through. Gotham breathed, fragile but defiant. The nightmare was not ended, only survived, and the seeds of resistance once planted could never be fully erased. To walls, and the city was a hushed, broken echo of itself. Streets were jagged, shadows clinging unnaturally to walls, and the skyline distorted like a reflection in shattered glass. Slenderman's presence was more oppressive than ever. Every neon sign, every flickering streetlight seemed to pulse with his unseen will. Even the wind whispered doubt, curling around corners and slipping into empty eyes. The heroes stood at the edge of the chaos, aware that this was no longer a battle of strength or speed. It was a war of perception, and every second counted. Batman's cowl shadowed his grim face as he surveyed the city from a high rooftop. He felt the psychic pulse of Slenderman threading through every mind, probing, seeking, tempting. Children vanished in one blink, leaving behind only echoes of laughter twisted into screams. The entity had learned. It no longer relied on physical confrontation. It attacked memory, identity, and hope. Every hero had already faced illusions, but now the assault was coordinated, omnipresent, and relentless. There is no corner left untouched, he thought, no mind too strong to corrupt. Superman hovered above, eyes glowing crimson with a mixture of desperation and focus. His breath crystallized in the cold night air as he tried to maintain a mental shield for those below. Every flicker of a faceless child, every warped memory of failure threatened to shatter his resolve. Lois's face appeared repeatedly, alternating between laughter and terror, a reminder of what he could lose if he faltered. He clenched his fists, feeling the psychic weight pressing down, yet still he fought, projecting willpower like a beacon in the darkness. Wonder Woman moved through the streets, sword in hand, deflecting shadow tendrils that slithered along walls, wrapping around innocent civilians. Slenderman's influence twisted reality. The pavement itself writhed beneath her feet. Every choice she made, every life she protected, was met with counter-illusion. Children screaming for help where no one existed, collapsing buildings where none stood moments before. The moral weight of impossible choices bore down on her. I cannot fail, not again, she thought. Each strike of her sword was a prayer, each parry an act of defiance. Zatanna's voice rang out in magical incantations, creating pockets of stability in the city. Words formed glowing sigils in the air, weaving through streets to anchor civilians' minds. Nightwing darted between them, guiding frightened children into temporary safe zones. But each act of protection drew the entity's attention. Slenderman's faceless heads emerged from shadows, tendrils reaching for Zatanna's protective wards, twisting the light into darkness. Every moment of resistance came at a cost, and fatigue crept into even the strongest minds. Then came the first horrifying sign of Slenderman's ultimate plan. The city's skylines split, forming a gaping void in the sky. Faceless children, dozens of them, drifted in mid-air, their eyes empty, their voices unified into a chorus of quiet pleading. It was a psychic beacon, feeding Slenderman's influence like a conduit. Heroes felt the pull, their own memories of loss and guilt twisting into the void. One wrong thought, one slip of focus, and they could join the endless, faceless chorus. Batman's voice cut through the mental fog. Focus. Anchor yourselves. They want our despair, not our action. His words were more than command. They were lifelines. Superman responded with a surge of will, anchoring civilians below, pushing back against the entity's psychic tide. Wonder Woman shouted instructions, cutting off tendrils and forming protective paths. Zatanna's words shimmered like glass, holding the fractured reality together, while Nightwing's agility kept vulnerable points clear. Despite the coordinated defense, Slenderman escalated, manifesting fully, a towering, impossible figure whose limbs stretched into infinity, faceless heads spinning independently, tendrils flicking like whip cracks across the city. The entity spoke, not with sound, but with a psychic resonance. Every mind bends, every hope fails, every child belongs to me. The words invaded thoughts, seeding terror. Even the most disciplined heroes faltered for a heartbeat, the weight of potential failure pressing like stone. But the children themselves became unexpected anchors. Those Slenderman thought-broken began whispering to each other, small acts of recognition piercing the psychic storm. A laugh, a song, a remembered game, tiny defiance multiplied into a web of resistance. The entity hissed, recoiling from the collective will it could not dominate. Batman realized the key. The children's connection is stronger than my fear. Every linked mind formed a crack in Slenderman's foundation, and cracks, no matter how small, could widen into collapse. The city trembled, the void above pulsing with the entity's frustration. Slenderman's tendrils thrashed, striking at heroes and children alike, but for every mind it attempted to dominate, another resisted. Hope became weaponized, not through speeches or grand gestures, but through small, deliberate acts of presence and courage. Even in exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty, the heroes and children held fast. And in that fragile, electric moment, the tide began to turn. The void above the city rippled like a wound in reality. Slenderman's tendrils lashed with terrifying precision, threading through alleyways, slipping into windows, probing the minds of the vulnerable. Every child he touched convulsed in place, their bodies suspended between reality and nightmare. Their eyes, empty and glassy, reflected not just fear but the echo of countless stolen souls. The city quaked beneath the psychic pressure, and even the hero's combined will seemed fragile against the entity's infinite patience. Superman fought with every ounce of strength, propelling himself through the air to intercept tendrils before they reached the children. Each touch he blocked threatened to crack his own mental defenses. Memories of Krypton's destruction, the people he couldn't save, hovered at the edges of his mind, drawn forth by Slenderman's insidious influence. He clenched his fists, forcing the guilt and pain back down, anchoring himself to the present. One slip, he knew, and the void would consume him too. Batman moved like a shadow among the streets, coordinating defenses with mechanical precision. Every building, every street corner became part of a network of safety, a lattice of mental anchors to resist the entity. He could see the faint outlines of faceless forms lurking in abandoned buildings, children caught in a half-dream, half-reality state. With Nightwing, he guided them back into the real world, whispering grounding words that acted like small lifelines. Each rescue was a battle, every action a fragile thread keeping the city from unraveling entirely. Wonder Woman confronted her own nightmares as the void expanded. Her sword met tendrils that seemed to twist her mind as well as her surroundings. She saw visions of those she had failed in battle, villages she couldn't save, people she couldn't protect, and the weight threatened to break her resolve. Yet she pressed forward, each strike a declaration. Pain does not equal surrender. Every child she shielded became a point of resistance, a spark against the darkness. The more she fought, the more the void above flickered, as if Slenderman was tasting fear but finding it sour. Satana's magic wove shimmering wards through the city, glowing lines of protective energy cutting through the psychic storm. She felt the entity probing, testing her limits, trying to twist her spells into chains. Children responded instinctively to her words, humming tunes and repeating phrases that anchored their reality. The simplest acts became profound weapons: laughter, a game, the memory of a parent's touch. Slenderman recoiled from these moments of pure human instinct, unable to convert them into despair. Even he had limits. Then came the nightmare escalation. Slenderman fractured reality further, folding streets and alleyways over one another like a broken mirror. Heroes found themselves moving in impossible loops, confronted by duplicates of themselves, twisted by fear and self-doubt. Superman faced shadowy versions of his parents, accusing him of failure. Batman confronted endless reflections of Gotham burning under his watch. Wonder Woman saw countless innocent lives crushed by her inaction. Each confrontation was designed to collapse their sanity, and for a heartbeat, the heroes teetered. But the children became unexpected anchors. Those Slenderman thought lost in despair began reaching out to one another, holding hands in dreams, forming chains of resistance. Their instinctive courage created a network of light within the void. Superman, sensing the shift, focused on amplifying this collective strength, projecting his will to stabilize their minds. Zatanna's magic pulsed in harmony with these acts, reinforcing the protective lattice. Batman and Wonder Woman coordinated physical and mental defenses, creating a synergy of presence, action, and trust. Slenderman hissed through the psychic storm, a soundless resonance that threatened to unravel the city entirely. Faceless children swirled in impossible geometries above, but their connection to one another started to fracture his control. Every whisper of bravery, every act of defiance, tore holes in the nightmare construct. The void was still vast and threatening, but it had become unstable. Nightwing's quick thinking turned small victories into momentum. He guided children towards safe zones, each step weakening Slenderman's influence. The entity lashed out personally now, sending illusions of parents and friends turned monstrous, attacking the heroes and the children they protected. But each attack was met with coordinated defiance. Superman's strength, Wonder Woman's courage, Batman's precision, Zatanna's magic, Nightwing's agility. They were no longer individual resistances. They formed a human network that challenged Slenderman's every move. And then, from the center of the void, Slenderman manifested fully, not a shadow this time, but a towering, impossible figure whose faceless head split into infinite versions of every child he had tried to control. It was the final escalation, a direct assault on reality itself. But the children, united in small chains of resistance, hummed, spoke, sang, and remembered. Their innocence became a beacon piercing the darkness, unraveling the psychic web that had bound the city. The first crack appeared. One faceless head collapsed, flickering into a child's smile, then another, then more. Slenderman's tendrils thrashed, trying to recapture control, but the network held firm. The heroes, sensing the moment, surged together, projecting combined strength, presence, and willpower into the void. The entity screeched, a psychic resonance that shook minds and hearts alike. The battle had shifted. Slenderman could no longer manipulate the city with impunity. For the first time, he faced resistance rooted not in force, but in connection, memory, and choice. The nightmares, while still dangerous, had lost their inevitability. The void above Gotham and Metropolis shivered with tension, a living blackness that had begun to taste defeat. Slenderman's towering faceless form loomed over the city, but cracks now ran along his impossible limbs. Every child freed from his control sent ripples of resistance through him, weakening his psychic tendrils. The air vibrated with the faint hum of defiance, a resonance that no nightmare could fully suppress. Even from the shadows between worlds, Slenderman realized his perfect control was slipping. Superman hovered above the city, eyes glowing with focused heat vision, scanning for the children still trapped. Each one was like a beacon of reality, and their collective will was now a force strong enough to bend the edges of the nightmare. He could feel Slenderman's presence probing at his mind, trying to dredge up guilt, doubts, and fears. Memories of lives he had failed to save clawed at him, loyalties broken, choices made too late, but he forced them down, anchoring himself to the present. One wrong step and the fragile resistance could collapse entirely. Batman worked in tandem with Nightwing, moving through impossible streets folded upon themselves, guiding children back to safety. The city itself had become a maze of psychic distortions, alleys looping into skyscrapers, stairways ending in empty voids, yet the heroes' combined focus kept the children oriented. Each whispered reassurance, each guiding hand, built a network of defiance. Even the youngest children responded instinctively, their courage feeding the heroes' strength. Gotham's streets had never seen such a battle, not of fists or bullets, but of will, memory, and heart. Wonder Woman confronted visions of her past failures, summoned by Slenderman to destabilize her resolve. She saw villages crushed beneath invisible hands, innocents lost, and soldiers she had led who had perished. The illusions struck at her pride and sense of duty, yet she stood firm. Each child she shielded became a node of resistance, every act of protection a spark against the all-encompassing darkness. Her sword became a beacon, cutting through both tendrils of shadow and the illusions that sought to crush hope. Zatanna's magic pulsed like a living heartbeat, weaving protective wards that shimmered against Slenderman's psychic assaults. She traced threads of energy through the city, connecting children, heroes, and bystanders alike, forming a lattice that defied the entity's control. Every act of courage, from a child speaking a defiant word to a mother embracing her terrified offspring, reinforced her spells. Even Slenderman could not fully suppress the raw strength of these instinctive human connections. Then came the moment of revelation. Slenderman tried to manifest his ultimate form, a body stretching beyond comprehension, arms splitting into infinite faceless limbs, reaching into the minds of every person in the city simultaneously. The void's edges bled into the real world, and the heroes felt their sanity teeter. Superman struggled to maintain focus, his heat vision erratic. Batman's strategic calm flickered. Wonder Woman's sword trembled. Zatanna's wards shimmered wildly. It was the children who turned the tide. No longer silent, they began speaking in unison, their voices rising over the psychic roar. Names of lost friends, memories of shared laughter, the simple joys of life. They called to each other and to the heroes, anchoring themselves in the real world. The resonance created a psychic feedback loop, one that Slenderman could not manipulate. Every tendril he threw faltered against the network of living defiance. His faceless head split and trembled, his form unstable, as if reality itself rejected him. Superman, sensing the critical moment, projected his will to amplify the collective courage. Wonder Woman's sword pulsed with light, slicing through the nightmare's architecture. Batman coordinated evacuations and strategic blocks, moving children and civilians through safe corridors. Zatanna wove her most complex spell yet, threading hope and memory into a psychic lattice strong enough to resist Slenderman's final manipulations. Nightwing led small groups, reinforcing human presence in the streets and dreams alike. Slenderman screamed, not a sound that could be heard, but a psychic resonance felt in every corner of the mind. His tendrils twisted, flailing, as if reality itself had become a cage he could not escape. The children's network of courage pulsed outward, fracturing his form further. Shadows collapsed, faceless limbs dissolved, and the void began to retract. Every act of resistance, no matter how small, was a hammer strike against his impossible architecture. In the climax of this psychic storm, the city seemed to breathe as one. The children, the heroes, and the ordinary citizens, each connected by defiance, empathy, and courage, became an unbroken line of reality itself. Slenderman, faced with this unprecedented unity, faltered, his mind unable to comprehend the strength of the human spirit. His towering figure shuddered, then shattered, fragments of shadow dissolving into nothingness. The nightmare waned, leaving only the faintest echo in the edges of perception. For the first time, Gotham and Metropolis were free. The children blinked awake, bodies trembling but minds intact. The heroes, exhausted but resolute, gathered among the streets, recognizing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The void was gone, or perhaps only diminished, but the lesson was clear. Slenderman's power, though vast, could not overcome connection, courage, and choice. And yet, somewhere beyond the perception of the world, the faintest ripple of shadow remained, a reminder that the mind's darkness never fully disappears. But for now, humanity had reclaimed its reality, refusing to bend to fear or manipulation. The heroes knew this victory was fragile, yet profound. The battle had been fought not with brute force, but with the immeasurable, unpredictable strength of the human will. The sun rose over Gotham and Metropolis, but it felt different. Fragile, tentative, as if the world itself was exhaling after a nightmare that refused to end. Slenderman's shadow, though shattered, still lingered at the edges of perception, a faint whisper brushing the minds of those who had glimpsed the abyss. The streets were quiet, not because the city was safe, but because everyone had been changed. Children clutched one another, parents hugged tighter, and heroes walked among them no longer as untouchable figures, but as guides through a world that had tested their humanity. Superman hovered above the city, scanning for any lingering shadows. His eyes, glowing softly now, reflected exhaustion and a deep understanding. Some battles were not meant to end with a clean victory. Slenderman had been reduced, diminished, forced to retreat, but his influence lingered like smoke in a cavern. Every mind he had touched carried a memory, a scar, a lesson. It would be the responsibility of heroes and humans alike to ensure that these fractures did not grow into a new nightmare. Batman walked through the streets with deliberate steps, checking every building, every alley, every rooftop. The city felt alive and fragile, as if Gotham itself understood the thin line between order and chaos. He spoke to small groups of children, helping them describe the horrors they had faced, not in silence but aloud, giving words to the terror that had once controlled them. Each confession, each shared memory was a small hammer against the lingering fear Slenderman sought to embed permanently. "You were never powerless," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And you never will be." Wonder Woman knelt beside a group of children in a park that had been warped by Slenderman's influence. The ground was uneven, the shadows still stretching strangely, but she guided them through exercises of courage and trust. She taught them that fear was natural, that nightmares could exist without defining them. Every child who spoke, who laughed, who refused to bow to terror, became a node of light in a web that extended far beyond what Slenderman could control. Diana realized that victory was not in destruction, but in empowerment. Zatanna's magic hummed softly, threading through the city like invisible roots, knitting together moments of courage, kindness, and defiance. Each child who had once vanished, each citizen who had felt the pull of the nightmare, became part of this living spell. Slenderman could no longer manipulate isolated fear because fear itself had been diluted, shared, named, and resisted. The city's psychic architecture now belonged to the people, not the shadow. Yet even as relief spread, a new awareness settled among the heroes. Slenderman's mind had been immense, his grasp over perception and reality profound. While he had been fractured, traces of him remained, subtle and almost imperceptible, waiting for moments of weakness, fatigue, or despair. Superman understood this with a clarity that chilled him. The threat was never fully gone. Humanity's strength was unpredictable, resilient, but fragile. It was a truth that demanded vigilance, not panic, courage without arrogance. Carol Ferris, who had witnessed the battle from a distance during the worst of the nightmare, arrived to help organize recovery efforts across the city. She coordinated volunteer networks, therapy groups, and communal support for families who had endured the psychic onslaught. Her presence reminded everyone that heroes were not defined by invincibility, but by the choice to act when the world seemed hopeless. Even Batman allowed a small, rare smile, acknowledging the simple power of shared humanity over isolation and fear. Then came the final echo. A faint flicker in the corner of a child's eye, a movement at the edge of a streetlight, something that reminded them, just for a moment, of the faceless entity they had faced. The instinctual fear surged, but it was met immediately by a wall of defiance. Children clasping hands, adults standing firm, and heroes reinforcing the lesson that they were never alone. Slenderman's influence, once terrifying and absolute, now recoiled from collective courage. Superman and Wonder Woman stood together on a rooftop overlooking the city. They exchanged a glance that needed no words. They had won a battle, yes, but the war for the mind and spirit of their people was ongoing. The hero's role was no longer about grandiose feats or public spectacle. It was about sustaining hope, guiding recovery, and maintaining presence without demanding reverence. This, they understood, was the real fight. Nightwing joined them, quiet but resolute. He shared stories of children returning to school, of families rebuilding routines, of neighborhoods reclaiming streets warped by shadows. Each small act of normalcy was a strike against the lingering darkness. Each ordinary choice a rebellion against Slenderman's attempted dominion. Even Batman, ever the strategist, acknowledged that victory in this war was measured not in dramatic confrontations, but in the persistence of life itself. By the time night fell over the city, a sense of fragile equilibrium had returned. Shadows still stretched unnaturally, wind carried faint whispers, but the streets were alive, and the people had begun to reclaim them. Slenderman had been diminished, reduced to whispers at the edges of perception, no longer a master, but a cautionary memory of what could happen when fear goes unchecked. The DC universe had survived, not unscathed, but awake, aware, and determined. And somewhere, in the thin spaces beyond the world, Slenderman lingered, watching, sensing, but powerless to impose the total control he had once envisioned. Humanity had reclaimed its mind, its courage, its will. The heroes understood this truth profoundly. Darkness could challenge them, terrify them, even fracture their reality, but it could not conquer what they chose to defend.
For the first time in that long, twisted night, the faceless shadow understood something essential. Control was an illusion, fear only a tool, and the human spirit was far too intricate, unpredictable, and resilient to ever be fully claimed. The battle was over. The war, in its truest sense, would never end, but humanity had learned the vital truth: they would endure. And so the city breathed again, not in celebration, but in persistence, not in perfection, but in continuity. Heroes walked among the people, shadows lingered, but life went on. And that simple act of standing, of choosing, of refusing to bend entirely to fear, was the most powerful defiance of all.